time we reviewed on a Thursday, all the kids turn around and look at the instructor. The last time we reviewed on a Thursday, everybody look at the teacher, everyone's looking at me. I distributed this. Now this is what it says on the front. So I want everybody to look and see if they got this. It says on the front, a document-based question. Right, so if you were here last Thursday, you got this. If you were not here, then I'm going to give you a copy of it. All right, Darius, would you pass these up? Pass these up to your friends. Over here, would you pass these back? Nate, to your friends. Now, we are not going to talk about this question today. We talked about it a week ago. But if you look at this, if you have an opportunity to look at this, and let's just take a peek at it just for 1 minute here. When you take the test a week from tomorrow, you will get a document-based question that's packaged the same way. So in the literature that they've given us for the test, they are having part A document-based question, and they say there, direction. Question 1 is based on the accompanying documents. The documents have been edited for the purpose of this exercise. You are advised to spend 15 minutes planning and 45 minutes writing your answer. Your responses on line pages write your responses on line pages that follow the question. In your responses, you should do the following. Now, they list the things that you should do, and then they give you the question, right? So, I mean, we've written essays before, and if you write a good essay, you'll do the things that are listed here. But the one thing that I'd like to point out to you, they do say that state a relevant thesis, support the thesis with relevant arguments, of course, right? Incorporate all or all but one of the documents into your argument. So when you do get that document-based essay, they want you to do your best to incorporate that into your essay. Now, I thought when we went over this last Thursday, that the documents were very understandable relative to the question. So I don't know if you're going to have trouble with that or not, but they want you to somehow or another incorporate them. And the documents do lead to kind of a response. I mean, this question is about continuity and change, and it focuses on, an issue, and the issue is the experience of African Americans who migrated from the rural South to the urban areas of the North, 1910 to 1930. And so what you're to write about is how their experience was the same and how things changed, right? And if you think about that while you're reading the documents, then you kind of write next to them, change or same, And so whatever the question might be, whatever theme it might be, you try to incorporate the documents into that theme. Now you have a dead hour to do it, which, in retrospect, we've written a long time. An hour doesn't seem like a long time, but I don't know. I mean, there you go. This is the example that they gave. If you wanted to see a discussion of that, it's the review session of last Thursday. Here is the multiple choice practice test. I gave you this a number of times. Does everybody have this? It's the multiple choice practice test. Now, if you do not have this, or if you remember me giving it to you, this is the best practice for the actual AP multiple choice test, and for the test that you are going to take on next Thursday. So next Thursday, you are going to take a test that looks just like this. So the test that you take on next Thursday is going to be just like this. The only difference, instead of being 29 questions, it is going to be 44 questions. But they'll be packaged just like these questions are, where you have a text or something, and then 3 questions about that text. Or a picture, And then questions about the picture. Let's see. Oh, if you go to question number 20, the federal government spending 1960 to 1968. So there you go. And the charts and graphs, you're going to see cartoons, various things. And then you know, if you look at question 20, it says the overall pattern of spending in the table most directly reflects which of the following federal policy positions at the time. Right, so you look at that and then you have to associate that. And sometimes you might not know, but I don't think on the AP test there is a penalty for guessing. So you should take the best guess that you can make, right? Because there's no penalty for guessing, right? All right, so this would be the best practice for the test you're going to take Thursday. I don't think I gave you the answers, so I'll have to get those for you. Right, so you should have that. Now, in addition to that, there is another practice test that I gave you. This is not the AP. This is a commercially made practice test, more questions. But I really think that reading and doing practice questions, multiple choice questions, you need that, Andrew? Is a good way to study. I mean, because it actually, you know, when you sit down to study, if you really just are reading it, you know, reading over things, and I do that, you know, I mean, here, pass this up. I mean, I'll just read over things, but I think that it makes you more active if you actually answer the multiple choice questions. And you know what you might consider doing? Do it together. So, you know, I mean, maybe have your mothers make cookies, and then go to somebody's house, and then go through reviews, and then talk to each other about it. You know, say, well, okay, I think this is the answer, I think this is the answer. And the ones you don't know, look up and think about it. And the process of doing that will be valuable, right? Okay, so you have that. Yes. Pardon me? No, I didn't give it to you yet. Now, here is another thing. I don't know if you have this. This was 2 examples of the short response essay questions about the Declaration of Independence. Right? So it says here, evaluate the extent to which the these are the long, not short response. Evaluate the extent to which the Declaration of Independence marked a turning point in American history. Analyze what changed and what stayed the same from the period immediately before the Declaration to the period immediately following. Now, I did a review session a couple of weeks ago that was based on these 2 questions. Does everybody have these questions? Pass that up behind you. Everybody has those questions? So these are the long response questions, and I think that on the AP test that you have to do one of a choice of 2. So you have to do one document-based essay, one long response essay of a choice of 2. Another one? And then you have to do, I think, 2 short response essays, and then the multiple choice. Now, last thing. If you have this book, take it out. Right? So if you have this book with you now, take it out. If you do not have this book, too bad. No. Yes, if you do not have this book, then you can write these terms down. If you have this book, turn to page 36. So in this book, and if you don't have this book today, bring it with you in the future. And if you lost the book, let me know, and I only have a few copies left. So I want to make sure that those of you that didn't get it at all get it. But I want to do the first 20 terms in this book today, or 15 or 18 or whatever. I want to come back on Monday night and do most of the rest, and then finish them on Thursday, along with reviewing the Cold War. So when you answer questions on the test that you are going to take tomorrow, you're not going to answer any questions on the Cold War. But we are going to talk about the Cold War Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then you're going to take a test on Thursday, and you're going to complete the test that you took tomorrow. And then you're going to take a test that looks like this multiple choice test right here. Now, I looked over the test that I'm going to give you, and almost every question is about something that we, talked about on some level, right? So, okay. And like I said, I don't know what we're going to do with the scale on that test. We're going to see how you do. And depending upon how you do, we'll scale the test. So it's, if you do better than most kids, you'll be all right, right? I don't know what that's going to be. We'll see. I have a feeling that kids are going to do better than I expect. I'm hoping. Okay. So today we want to go to these terms, and the first term is Calvinist, the second term is puritanical. And what that takes us to is colonization. So, when we first started the course, we established North America as a place that was inhabited by a large Native American population that was widely diverse. And then that continent and that hemisphere was discovered by Columbus, and there was colonization by Spain and then Portugal and then other countries that were going to colonize for 100 years before the British are going to establish a permanent settlement in North America. The first permanent settlement in North America is Jamestown, which is a business endeavor. The Virginia Company establishes the Jamestown colony as a place to generate income from. It's a joint stock company that intends to make money by colonization. We know that the Plymouth colony was established next, and then subsequently Massachusetts Bay. Those New England colonies that were established were largely related to religious issues. And those religious issues involved the Protestant Reformation and Calvinism. Now, in thinking about Calvinism, Calvinism is the theology and ideology of Christianity that comes from the pen and the mind of John Calvin, a French theologian, who takes the ideas of the Protestant Reformation and reduces them to certain principles of Christianity. Followers of Calvin are going to reject Catholicism and kind of support a new version, I shouldn't say a new version, a different version of Christianity. The Calvinists were Christians. They believed that Jesus was God, which is the fundamental belief of Christianity, right? Which distinguishes Christianity from other religions, right? That Jesus was God incarnate, God as man, and that the writings of Jesus are guides for people's lives, the New Testament. And Calvin is going to reduce that to kind of the principles of Christianity, and his followers are going to be known as Calvinists. Now, those Calvinists are going to be in England Puritans, right? Puritans are Calvinistic in their theology and ideas about religion, man, God, and church. And apparently, Calvinistic theology, the Puritans, who were Calvinists, are going to feel that they can't practice their religion freely in England after a certain point. Why not? What is it about the Calvinists and the Puritans that is going to make them feel uncomfortable in England? Yes? Oh, I was thinking of a more general kind of response. Yes, go ahead, Darius. So this Calvinistic ideology, oh, let me ask you this. If we were going to associate one thing with Calvinism, what would it be?
Predestination.
Predestination.
Oh, it might have sense.
Predestination. The idea that from the beginning of time, the status of one's soul is predetermined. Whether or not you are going to be saved or not is predetermined for eternity. And that all that you really can do is try to discern whether you are predetermined to be saved. Right? So when we talk about Calvinism, predestination is central to it. But fundamentally, the other aspect of Calvinism, and what alienates the Calvinists from the Church of England specifically, is that the Calvinistic ideology kind of minimizes ritual and tradition in terms of practice of worship, ceremonialism, right? Even in terms of church hierarchy, right? The Calvinists are going to believe in a democratic church where the membership, or at least the saved membership, selects the clergy, and the clergy serves the congregation. And in England, there was the Church of England that was headed by the king. And the Calvinists are going to oppose some of the liturgical practices of the Church of England, and they are going to challenge the Church of England, and in doing so, they challenge the authority of the king. Now, in essence, what the Calvinists in England want to do is purify the Church of England of all of the vestiges of Catholicism. Henry VIII breaks the Church of England away from the Catholic Church, and what the Calvinists / Puritans want to do is go all the way. Go all the way to the Calvinistic ideas of Protestant religion. Because of the tension between the Puritans and the Church of England, those Puritans are going to migrate in large numbers to the to British North America, starting in 1630. The Pilgrims are going to come in 1620 and establish the Plymouth colony, but the real great migration of Puritans from England to the United States, or to, British North America, to Massachusetts Bay, is going to be 1630 to 1640. You can even write in there, that's usually referred to as the Great Migration, where a large number of Puritans are going to come. Now, also what I would associate with that large number of Puritans that come and settle in Massachusetts Bay and eventually spread out all through New England is John Winthrop and his speech on the Arabella, a motto for Christian charity. What is your recollection? Remember, Winthrop is going to be the long-term leader, the long-time leader of Massachusetts Bay. Go ahead, Matt.
City on the Hill.
Yes. Associate his speech, the model of Christian charity, his sermon, with this idea of a city on the hill. Now, Andrew, what does that idea of a city on a hill mean?
Have the best city that everyone.
Say it again.
Have a city that everyone in the world can look up to.
Okay, so this is a place where everyone is looking. This city on a hill, a glimmering city on the hill. Meaning that the Puritans that go to Massachusetts Bay have a sense of mission. We are here to show the world the way it can be. A sense of mission. Right now, that idea of a sense of mission could be construed as an element of American identity. So if we're looking for American identity, which is a big deal in kind of the AP, the identity of America. So what could be more fundamental to American identity than the reason that people migrated to the 13 colonies? And one of the reasons was a religious motivation to prove to the world what a godly community could really do. And in doing so, you would behave, if you look at the second term, puritanically, right? Puritanically, which meant that you would adhere to how the mission was defined by the church leadership. Winthrop and others would say that the mission is defined in this way. This is the way the godly community looks. This is the behavior of the people in the godly community. This is the way that they treat each other. This is the way they worship. This is the way their church leadership is organized. Now, remember, in Massachusetts Bay, it was leadership by the elite. But the elite in Massachusetts Bay were the visible saints, the saved. There was, in New England, a certain equality amongst the people economically. You know, most people that migrated to that colony were small subsistence farmers that eked out a living on small plots of ground and focused their attention on the sense of mission and their behavior and searching for signs that they were part of the saved, right? The visible saints. In terms of like status was defined in terms of religion. Now, one of the things that we can say about colonial New England, as it is kind of being populated, is that, you know, religion and the definition of religion is going to be important. But when people disagree with the mission, that's going to be what expands out of Massachusetts Bay. And when there is land that is no longer available there, that's also what's going to push out of Massachusetts Bay. Eventually, by 1660 in New England, there is going to be Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island. Who do we associate with Rhode Island? Yes. Not Anne Hutchinson as much as Anne Hutchinson goes to Rhode Island, but we associate with Rhode Island. Go ahead, Samantha. He's our favorite. He's the founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams. We associate Roger Williams with Rhode Island. Who do we associate with Connecticut?
Hooker.
Thomas Hooker. The significance of Connecticut, it is the first written constitution in American history, is in Connecticut, the fundamental orders. Oh, going back a little bit, what was the Mayflower Compact? That is New England as well. Go ahead, Darius. I mean, it was the Pilgrims coming over, and they established, you know, before they got off the boat, they agreed that they would establish a government by their own consent, the free males on the boat. So even in New England, there is this kind of germinating self-government. And even in Virginia, there is this germinating self-government. There's not democracy in colonial America. There's not democracy in Massachusetts Bay. But there is, in fact, representative government among some, usually either property owners or church members who are eligible to vote for representatives who make rules for the community. Now, religion is important in New England, but as time goes on, religious fervor begins to wane. That sets the stage for the Great Awakening. There are two Great Awakenings in American history. One, you could probably identify for the first Great Awakening as 1739 to 1741. So the first Great Awakening in American history, you could probably say is 1739 to 1741. What two names do we associate with it? Yes?
Jonathan Edwards?
Jonathan Edwards is one name that we associated with it. And another name, go ahead. George Whitefield. So, Whitefield, right? So George Whitefield, I think is how it's pronounced, and Jonathan Edwards are the names that we associate with the First Great Awakening. 1739 to 1741. Now, awakening implies that it is an evangelical religious revival, meaning that, you know, by the 1740s, people's religious fervor. Now remember, Massachusetts Bay is established in 1629 with this spirit of kind of, you know, a city on the hill. By 1740, that colony is 110 years old. The generation that established that colony was dead. The children of that generation was dead. Now it was the grandchildren of that generation. And the importance of religion to establish the colony had faded amongst many. And so it was Jonathan Edwards who is going to say that, look, this kind of cerebral approach to religion, this idea that you understand that you are a sinner and destined from hell, and that God has saved you by His grace, is not enough, right? Secularism, and you see that word there for 5, secularism, or the secular, which is the non-religion, was seeping into society. So instead of people behaving based on the tenets of Calvinism and being motivated by their religious faith, they were increasingly motivated by secular things: money, pride, prestige, political power, etc. Now, it is going to be Edwards and Whitefield that is going to try to revive the former fervor, right? Hence, a religious revival. I should mention one thing. One of the things that prompts the First Great Awakening is the Enlightenment. What's the difference between the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening? Let's hear from Anika. Anika usually is good for one good solid response. Anika, you are a student, are you not, of the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment. What's the difference? I mean, well, let's start with this. What's the Enlightenment? I mean, what do you associate with the Enlightenment?
More like based on...
What word do you associate with it? You're getting mad at me, aren't you? You want me to go to Marissa, don't you? You're thinking, if I stall a little bit, he'll go over to Marissa. Go ahead, Marissa. What word do you associate with the Enlightenment?
Logic?
Well, it's a decent word. Logic, yes.
Reason, scientific experimentation.
Reason, scientific experimentation. The Enlightenment is this idea. It's an intellectual, it's a movement, it's a way of thinking. It is the idea that the universe makes sense, that it can be explained, that through human reason and scientific effort, right, people can shape their world to be better. Right? I mean, that's the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is going to challenge religion on some level. I mean, there's going to be an initial challenge between enlightened thinking, that you can understand and explain your world through reason, logic, and science, and religion, which kind of explains the world as being kind of the discretion of God. Right? You know, enlightened thinking might say that there are natural laws that govern the universe. Religious thinking might say God arbitrarily decides what is going to transpire. So there's an inherent kind of contradiction, at least initially, between these two ideas. Enlightened ideas tend to elevate man and diminish God, whereas religious ideas tend to elevate God and diminish man. And if you think about the Great Awakening, that's basically what Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield wanted people to do, is to put God's grace and the individual salvation more central into the psyche of the person, right? So that what's important is that you, the person, feels your decadence, your evil, your sinfulness, and understands the just utter grace of God to save you. That if you do this, it will transform you and make you different, right? That's the idea of the First Great Awakening, and that's the idea of the Second Great Awakening. Now, the Second Great Awakening is jumping forward, but McKenna, what time frame is the Second Great Awakening in? First Great Awakening, 1739 to 1741. Second Great Awakening, what do we associate it with, dear McKenna?
I don't think I remember.
I'll call on Jackie if you force me to. Go ahead, Jackie. What do we associate the Second Great Awakening with? A time, an event, a person, a movement, anything. Anika, remember you had no idea about the last one. What about the Second Great Awakening? What do we associate it with? Time, event, movement, anything. Go ahead.
It was after the era of the Indies.
It's in the 1830s, 1820s and 1830s. And yes, I mean, that's roughly in that time frame. the 1820s and 1830s, is the Second Great Awakening. And what we associate the Second Great Awakening with is that flowering of reform and eventually abolition. I mean, people inspired by the Second Great Awakening are going to be the people that move to temperance, abolition, treatment of the mentally ill. That's going to underlay those movements. But back to the First Great Awakening. One of the effects of the First Great Awakening is to divide religion between old lights and new lights. And you can see that the term for is old lights and new lights. The old lights were the ones that eventually reject the excesses of the Second Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening really involves a number of religious revivals in which George Whitefield is central. Outdoor revival sessions where Whitefield preaches a very demonstrative, emotional sermon that is intended to kind of, influence people to see the centrality of God in their lives, the importance of grace, and the decadence of their own behavior, and so that they transform. Right? Now, appealing to emotion had some excesses associated with it. People would fall on the ground, and anybody would believe that they could preach as long as they were inspired. And some people within the religious community said, enough. This has gone too far. We need order and stability and a trained clergy in order to provide for kind of, an appropriate religion. And, almost like saying, intellect and logic and training and knowledge are important. And the new lights were people that were more likely to say, no, what's important is inspiration rather than education. And the new lights represent the evangelical kind of sects of Protestantism, the Baptists, the Methodists. The new lights were more likely to be on the frontier. The new lights were more likely to attract more impoverished people or simpler people. The old lights tended to be more established and wealthier people. And it represents a division within Christianity. The other thing the Great Awakening is associated with is a challenge to authority. That during the Great Awakening, people challenged whether their ministers were saved or not. Right? So this challenge to authority is thought to be something that is a prelude to kind of the American Revolution. Now let's go to term 6, mercantilism. Mercantilism starts our conversation of the American Revolution. So once we have, colonies established in America, the American Revolution is fundamentally those colonies uniting and deciding to declare themselves independent from England. And we talked about that at length in another review session, why those colonies would do it. But part of any motivation has to be economic, right? So when we talk about, human behavior, certainly human behavior is influenced by economics. And the economic relationship between colonial America and England was defined by mercantilism. Now, what, if anything, do we associate with mercantilism? Yes? Sean Whelan. Good heavens, I hope there's a question about that. They'll probably have to come out and do an investigation at Gateway. If there's a question about bullion, 100% of the students get it right and say, this can never possibly be. There's got to be, yes? Pardon me? No, yes. Now, what Darius says is true. When you think of mercantilism, mercantilism implies a mother country and colonies, an empire. It's a way of organizing the economic activity of an empire.
May I have your attention, please? If you are parked behind the Fury Sports Complex, you need to move your car. Once again, if you are parked behind The Peoria Sports Center, your car needs to be moved. They have to prepare for the lost accident tomorrow. Go Gators.
Somehow I don't know that those two things are related. But remember, kids, in economics there's a lesson. Marginal benefit and marginal cost. So the marginal cost of this activity tomorrow is very high. The marginal benefit is questionable. Right? So we would say in most cases this is a poor economic decision. Right? You know, so we say if the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, you should do something. Right? Now, what you're doing now is a very good economic decision. The marginal benefit is much higher than the marginal cost. Although, in your mind, you might say, hey, maybe not this marginal cost, this is painful. But back to mercantilism. Mercantilism is what defines the economic relationship between the mother country and the colonies. An economic system for an empire. And the goal of mercantilism, right, is to build a favorable balance of trade. So the goal of mercantilism is to build a favorable balance of trade, which means what, Liam? Favorable balance of trade means you
export and import the same amount.
More. You export more than you import. So that's a favorable balance of trade. Now, the way that that's going to occur in mercantilism is that the mother country will regulate the economic activity of the empire in order to create a favorable balance of trade. So in mercantilism, the government of the empire, in the case of England, Parliament, passed legislation to regulate economic activity in order to promote a favorable balance of trade, which is going to limit what the colonies can do. Right? So in a mercantilistic system, the colonies represent markets for the mother country and places where certain products or resources that could not ordinarily be produced in the mother country were produced. Now, what was the legislation that was passed that enforces mercantilism? Go ahead, Andrew. Starting in 1550 through 1663, I should say 1650 through 1663, Parliament passed a series of laws that will first implement a mercantilistic system. The Navigation Acts. And the Navigation Acts are going to limit what the colonies can do. It's going to forbid the colonists from selling certain products outside or from anybody but England. It generates a list of enumerated products that can only be sold to England. Yes?
So it's almost like an embargo of other countries except in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, it's a restriction of trade. It's a restriction of autonomy, right? Now, I mean, mercantilism generally results in the mother country benefiting at the expense of the colonies. And so that raised the question, why would colonial America agree to be governed in that way? And the reason was that for the most part, mercantilism was not vigorously enforced in colonial America. What did we call that, Darius? Salutary neglect. Very disappointed you did not get that immediately. Very disappointed. Salutary neglect. We call that. And let me ask you this, Anika. When does salutary neglect kind of end? Say it. Say it with the end of. I will not call on Darius. He blew his opportunity. Say it, Stephanie, because yes.
Is it after like the war, war?
Yes, after the French and Indian War. I mean, isn't that the problem? The problem was that mercantilism was established but not enforced. And then in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, mercantilism is going to be enforced. And when it is enforced, colonial Americans don't like it. Right? They don't like the way that it's enforced. One of the ways that it's enforced, Matt, is with the writs of assistance. Remember we talked about that? Now, they argued, and go down to term 7, that the writs of assistance were a violation of their natural rights. Let me go through the natural rights argument, which I think is fundamental. The natural rights argument comes from the pen primarily of John Locke. Not exclusively John Locke, but primarily John Locke. And Locke is going to argue that humans, by virtue of their birth, are entitled to and endowed with certain natural rights. God gives it to them. They have the right to life, liberty, and property. Those are the inherent God-given rights that everyone has. Now, in a state of nature, Locke is going to argue that humans aren't able to protect their rights from their neighbors. And so what people do is they contract, they organize governments, and they contract with those governments. In other words, make agreements with those governments that if those governments protect and ensure their rights, they will obey the laws of the government establishes. So the purpose of government is to protect and ensure natural rights. And as long as government does that, the citizen...
Page Roche, please report to the front office. Page Roche to the front office.
The citizen has an obligation to obey the government. Now, the colonists are eventually going to argue that the behavior of the British Parliament is going to be a violation of their natural rights. Those violations of the natural rights is what's going to eventually justify a revolution. So how do you justify a revolution? Right? You justify a revolution, and Jefferson does this in the Declaration of Independence, using Lockean kind of logic. He says, well, look, here's the purpose of government. You know, he states it. You know, government is, you know, by the consent of the governed, right? The purpose is to protect and ensure natural rights. And the history of the present King of England has been injurious to those rights. And here's how. He's done this, he's done this, he's done this, he's done this, he's done this. All of those represented violations of rights. And so therefore, what are we doing? You know, we're revolting and establishing a government that we think will protect and ensure those rights. So natural rights is a big deal, you know, in terms of justifying the American Revolution. Now, go to term 8, gentry. I have no idea why I put that term there. I mean, the gentry represents a level of aristocracy that usually is associated with large land ownership. And the gentry is most often associated with the plantation colonies of the South. The largest landowners in the South are going to be the gentry. The Tidewater gentry is the gentry of Virginia. And the Tidewater gentry is going to be one of the groups that feels alienated by the enforcement of mercantilism and the actions of the British. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. No time. Virtual representation obviously is the British response to Jefferson or Locke or anyone else's, James Otis, or anyone else's arguments against their actions. I mean, the fundamental summary of the American argument against Britain, or the argument that Britain was violating American natural rights, is that taxation without representation is tyranny. Right? Taxation is coerced, you know, payments. It's theft. Right? You're forcing people to pay you money. The only justification for violating that right of property is consent. And the only way you can consent is if you elect the body that taxes you. So, when Parliament taxed the colonists for the purpose of generating revenue, it was, in the colonial mind, a violation of their natural rights. The British response was, Parliament represents everyone, regardless of whether or not you have representatives in Parliament. A privateer 10 is a private pirate. These were unleashed during wars like the American Revolution, to harass the shipping of your enemy. So the British are shipping products, and the United States would authorize private vessels to attack and try to confiscate cargo and crew. Privateers were a way of trying to stop trade. The term bicameral gets into the issue of making the Republican experiment work. So we know that Americans successfully revolt from England. In 1883, the Treaty of Paris establishes America's independence. The challenge now is that once you have revolted, very idealistically, under the terms of the Declaration of Independence, to establish a government that would not violate the rights of the people, right? I mean, if you say that we don't like Britain because of what they have done in terms of their government, now your challenge is to create a government that doesn't do the same thing. Understandably enough, the first attempt at that is to create an extraordinarily weak central government, which was the Articles of Confederation. Eventually, the weakness of those articles, as well as the kind of strength of the people in local governments, is going to lead to a groundswell of kind of support to replace those with a stronger central government, which is going to be the Constitution. Within the Constitution, there is a bicameral legislature. Bicameral means two houses, right? Two houses of a representative assembly. So an upper house and a lower house. What is implicit in having two houses of Congress? Something is implicit, yes.
It's almost like one for like the lower classes, one for the upper classes.
Yes. What's implicit is that there are two types of people,
The Senate.
right? So if you have a bicameral legislature, implicitly there are two types of people. And this is something that was borrowed from England. England had nobility and commoners that were represented in two separate houses. The United States has the House of Representatives and the Senate. But in the Constitution, the Senate represents the states, the House of Representatives represents the people. Now, the great compromise of the Constitution is the compromise between the big and small states over representation. The question is, in how will people be represented in the central government? The big states want representation on the basis of population. They say, well, look, in Virginia we have all these people and we should be more greatly represented than Rhode Island that has very few people. The small states wanted equal representation by state, so that even though they were a minority in terms of population, that their interests would be protected by equal representation, right? So the conflict between the big states and the small states over representation almost scuttles the Constitutional Convention. The Great Compromise is a compromise that is forged to some extent by Benjamin Franklin and others that incorporates both of those ideas. In the House of Representatives in the Constitution, representatives are appointed on the basis of population. Each state, based on their population, gets so many representatives. That's why there's a census every 10 years. So every 10 years in the Constitution, there must be a census to count. And you count so that you know how many representatives a state has. Right? The Senate, in the Senate, each state would have 2 senators regardless of size. So the compromise is the great compromise between representation by state and representation by the population. An indemnity is a payment for an inflicted damage. And usually when there were wars or other things or certain actions, people would be indemnified. They would be paid back for things that they encountered. The last term we'll stop with 14, is assumptions. But I just want to set this for a second. Assumption has to do with making the new constitutional government work. So if you think about rejecting the Articles of Confederation, a constitutional convention that was supposed to modify the Articles of Confederation, but ends up chucking them and creating an entirely new system of government that we nattily call the Constitution. And then a very tumultuous debate over whether or not that Constitution should be ratified as it was, right? And then after that debate, the challenge of actually implementing that new system of government is going to be taken up by a new president, George Washington, a new Congress, a Supreme Court, a federal bureaucracy, etc., to make the Constitution work. Now, the largest challenge in establishing this new government had to do with finances. And central to that is going to be Alexander Hamilton. So on Monday, when we pick up with this, we'll pick up with Hamilton. Hopefully, we'll get through a couple pages on Monday night. All right, so that's it for today. Don't like it. I'm against it. I'm an opponent. No. I'll save you the time. Don't drink and drive. Okay, now. I know what I will support it after the emails, but prior to the yes, I can. It was funny. I think you beat Matt. No. I'm gonna have to do it.
Okay.
Skibidi snacks are bomb.
I'll have to dig. That's good.
Or
I got this.